Greetings, students. I welcome you to this lecture on Hinduism. We will follow up more on the Hindu concept of God and also discuss Vedanta. So, when you ask a great sage of the Hindu tradition, what is the concept of God in Hinduism? They may reply the following way: we don't believe in many gods. We don't believe in one God. We believe there is only God. And this profound vision of oneness and non-duality, that nothing is away from that highest truth, nothing is away from that transcendent reality, is so much a part of the everyday attitude of a Hindu. And when I went to India, I really witnessed this up front. There were days that they took automobiles off the roads and they would adorn them with garlands and wash them, treating them like a god. And I remember a very elaborate ritual performed for the installation of a washer and dryer at the teaching center I was staying at. And I could go on and on. There's so much colorful ritual performed in India, offering gratitude and prayers for all aspects of life. And it truly is a way of life. Hinduism is truly a way of life that is infused with an attitude that nothing is away from God. Everything is sacred. Every tree, every flower, every human being, every bug, everything is sacred. And this attitude is nurtured in such a deep way that all Hindu religiosity, from the more tribal, indigenous expressions of religiosity to the more modern, expressions of religiosity. So, what's interesting about it is that on the surface, what you see are infinite images of divinity. There is the goddess Durga and her consort Shiva. There is the goddess Lakshmi and her consort Vishnu. There's the goddess Saraswati and her consort Brahma. And these represent the creative aspect, the sustaining aspect, and the transforming aspect of divinity. And then there's Ganesha, who's everywhere because he removes obstacles in life. And from those, there are infinite more images of the divine. Durga herself has so many different expressions. So in a way, when you hear that the Hindu concept of God is simply the idea that nothing is away from God, it almost seems in complete opposite to what you're witnessing with your senses. And this is what is very important to understand, is that because nothing is away from God from the Hindu perspective, that non-dual, all-encompassing presence can be invoked through anything because nothing is away from it. And so individuals who practiced rituals in the Hindu religions, it's almost like everyone gets to be a child, like you want to relate to God in this beautiful sari with all the gold bangles, and she has 8 arms because she can protect you and hug you at the same time, then that's celebrated. And if you want to relate to divinity through Shiva, and he's, as Nataraja and his great celebratory dance gesture, then you get to do that. And so in many ways, the Hindu tradition provides a very organic pluralism, because this idea that was shared by Ibu Patel, living in equal dignity and mutual loyalty, that's sort of built into Hinduism in the sense that because nothing is away from God, this non-dual reality can be invoked through anything. There's a lot of freedom and respect granted for different individuals in the way they pursue how they relate to the divine. So it's very profound and intriguing in that way. And I would say this was expressed at a teaching center on the East Coast where they had a male deity, Dakshinamurti, which is an aspect of Shiva, one of the main Hindu deities. And during the festival of the goddess that goes on for 9 nights, he was dressed as a woman. He was dressed in a sari and dressed as the goddess. And again, there's no conflict in this because they're not worshiping this male image or this female image. They're worshiping that one, a non-dual presence that is not separate from anything. Nothing is away from that being, that non-dual being. And so this deep, profound aspect of Hinduism is often misunderstood. And even when I went to a restaurant way back, I remember I was in Berkeley doing some research in the library, and I went to an Indian restaurant for lunch, and I was just sort of adoring all the different images of the divine that were on the wall. And I remember him just saying, but only one God, you know? And he was saying it a little differently, but it was the same idea, like, don't confuse all of these images with the idea that Hindus are polytheistic, because that's just untrue. So I think that's a really important part of forming a more complete story of Hinduism. And there's this word in one of our texts, the Studying Religion text, panentheism, which basically means all's in God, God is in all. And that would be the closest sort of ism to expressing the Hindu vision. But I think it's better to just try to use the concepts and words that you are given to express the Hindu concept of God. So the young man in the video, he raises the question whether the word God should even be used to express the concept of God in Hinduism. And he suggests using the phrase pure consciousness. And I've used this for many years, and I use different words intermittently depending on what I'm trying to express. But what I've realized over the years is that pure consciousness is a concept that's not necessarily any more clearly defined than the concept of God. And so although I think it is better in expressing the Hindu vision, it's not necessarily better understood by a Western mind to really understand what they believe. So this is where I would rely on Vedanta, because the vision that nothing is away from God is an attitude that's nurtured in all aspects of Hinduism and that you're just brought up with. And I've witnessed it, as I say, in India. I've witnessed it in, Hindu groups in the United States, and it's very much a deeply rooted aspect of being a Hindu. But as far as really being able to explain that concept, nothing is away from pure consciousness, like, what does that mean? We really have to rely on philosophical inquiry and that's expressed through Vedanta. And Vedanta, as I said, is basically the end of each of the 4 Vedas. So the Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, Atharva Veda, they all have sections at the end that are philosophical, and they comprise what's understood as Vedanta. And Vedanta is a teaching methodology to help individuals understand this highly esoteric philosophical truth. But what's very profound about Vedanta as a philosophical tradition is that it does rely on the other means of knowing, such as logic and perception, our empirical knowing, as ways to sort of boost us so that we can really kind of prepare ourselves to understand a higher esoteric truth. So everything is pure consciousness. Nothing is away from pure consciousness. I want to share some of the different ways I've tried to explain this concept over the years. So the first is, we have concepts of different elements that are highlighted in, say, ancient Chinese medicine, in ancient Indian medicine as well. And I find that we can sort of use our understanding of these elements to at least propose the possibility that we can directly know this concept of pure consciousness. So when I think of the 5 elements, I think of the earth first, the earth being, again, very dense. It's the grossest aspect of our physical reality. We can think of wet mud, it's hard to move. And then we have water, which is, fluid, it moves more. Obviously, in a strong current, it can be hard to move or move through, but we can also scoop it up with a cup and drink it. So we have a direct experience of earth, we have a direct experience of water, and we have fire. So we can see fire burn wood, burn paper. We know not to touch fire. And then we have air. Now, air is more subtle in the sense that we don't see it the way we see fire, water, and earth. But we still have a direct experience of it. We breathe in air. We breathe out air. So it's more subtle, and we can see its impact. We can see the wind blowing. And then we have space, which is even more subtle. We know space is there. We know we inhabit space. We know there is outer space. It's more subtle, and we don't see it in the way even that we see the impact of air, and definitely not in the way we see fire, water, and earth. But space is, and we never deny that. So then, can we imagine something even more subtle than space, even less visible? But yet, can we imagine that just as with earth, water, fire, air, space, that we have a direct experience of it? And I want to say yes, because philosophically, both in Vedanta and in the Western tradition, there's this question that arises. What am I? But what presupposes that question? And this is nicely highlighted by the short 5-minute video I provided for you in this section. So, as we know, Descartes came up with the saying, I think, therefore I am. And this is how Descartes is understood, a great modern philosopher. of classical Western philosophy. But if we read his meditations carefully, we know that he came to the conclusion that I am before concluding that what I am is a thinking thing. So what came first was I am. I can't negate myself. Amness. I can't negate amness. And Sadhvi, in part of the video that wasn't in the section you saw, at one point she says to Dennis, look, if I turn off the lights and then I ask you, are you there? You can't say no. You know, you're not going to say, well, let me check and I'll get back to you. Like, you have to say yes. So I am is an indubitable philosophical truth. And Vedanta starts with the same truth. I am. I can't negate myself. I am. But what am I? And that's the beginning of Vedanta. So it begins from the inside. What am I? And the whole teaching of Vedanta is to help a student, a seeker of truth, to recognize that what I am is that amness, which is pure consciousness. And that pure consciousness that is who I am is also what the world ultimately is, and is also what God ultimately is, or the sovereignty of all, what gave birth to it all, the substance of it all, the truth of it all. So pure consciousness is what is given as an answer to the three profound philosophical questions. What am I? What is the world? What is God? So this is a very profound philosophical vision, and in the Hindu tradition, they actually recognize that for someone to really understand the vision in a philosophical way, that it takes 12 years, studying and really going through the texts and really understanding and then integrating that knowledge in one's being, which is a different path than the nurturing of the attitude and just knowing that it's your dharma, it's your purpose to relate to the world through the vision of non-separateness, which is so beautiful in and of itself, and again expresses the richest part of Hindu religiosity. But Vedanta expresses this whole other aspect of Hinduism, which is gaining knowledge, gaining liberation, gaining enlightenment. So I'm going to give you a couple metaphors that are used in teaching the vision of Vedanta. And that is, one of them is the renowned clay pot. And this metaphor has been used for time immemorial. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in front of a teacher and they've held a clay pot, such as I'm doing. So let's now entertain some of the same philosophical questions, but in regards to a clay pot. So here is this clay pot, and we certainly want to say that the clay pot exists. I'm holding it in my hands, you can see it. So the clay pot exists, it has existence. So now if the clay pot says, I can't negate myself, I am, right? I am, but what am I? And what are we going to say as a witness? Well, ultimately what we're going to have to say is that I am clay, because if we take the clay away, we simply have non-existence, tucham in Sanskrit. So the truth, the ultimate truth, the highest truth of the clay pot is clay. Now the pot exists, it reality. I can put soil and I can plant something in it. So we don't want to say that the pot is unreal, but the pot is completely dependent on the clay, because if I take the clay away, I have non-existence. Whereas if I take a hammer to the pot, I can have a collection of clay shards. So my pot is no longer, but I still have clay. And I could even take a hammer to these clay shards, and then I would no longer have clay shards, I would have clay sand. So if we're asking, what is the ultimate truth of clay, of this clay pot, from its own perspective, I know that I am, but what am I? We have to say clay. And so in Sanskrit, there's a word satyam, which means truth, like ultimate truth, and mithya, which means dependent reality, because the pot is completely dependent on the clay for its existence. We take the clay away and we have non-existence. So if we relate this metaphor to Vedanta and the idea that the ultimate truth of all that is pure consciousness, it's expressing a similar vision in the sense that, according to Vedanta, if we take pure consciousness away from all that is, every aspect of this grand manifestation, if we take pure consciousness away, we have non-existence. And all name and form, all human beings and plant life and nature and objects are all dependently real, because if we take pure consciousness away, there's simply non-existence. So then, as the clay pot asks, I know that I am, but what am I? I ask, I know that I am, but what am I? And Vedanta says, pure consciousness. That's the truth of your being. That's what, if it was taken away, you would be non-existent. And that is also the truth of everything else that exists. So self, world, God have the same reference, pure consciousness. And that's where this idea that nothing is away from God, there is only God, it's a very deep philosophical vision, but that has a long withstanding teaching tradition that is aligned with it. And so as a Hindu, you grow up with this attitude to engage the world through this lens of non-separateness. Everything's sacred, everything's deserving of deep respect and even worship, because again, if nothing is away from God, then that supreme being, that pure consciousness, that non-dual presence can be invoked through anything. So if you grow up with that, and then there's a teaching that is ancient and so many sages have pursued and passed it down orally to more generations of students, and it's still being passed down orally. And that tradition is also a part of Hinduism. And what's beautiful about it is that I remember asking Dayananda Saraswati, who was the resident teacher where I was staying in India, I remember asking him, well, do all religions lead to the same goal? He had given a talk on that topic, and so I was very eager to hear his answer. And he said, no. He's like, religions teach different things. They have different concepts of God. They have different practices. they have different worldviews, they're different, so they don't lead to the same goal. But truth can be accessed through different pathways, and no tradition, according to Hinduism, owns truth. Truth cannot be owned. Truth is there for us to know, and they only understand Vedanta as being a very tried and true, secure, systematic path to knowing that truth in a very integrated, embodied way. But they will even encourage you, if you go study in India, not to try to convert to Hinduism or out of your tradition, because they really see that, you know, this study of truth, this highest esoteric truth, it's accessed by anyone of any tradition. And there were students who were, you know, came from Muslim backgrounds, Christian backgrounds, Buddhist backgrounds, Jewish backgrounds, from all different backgrounds, all different countries, coming to deeply inquire into this question of what am I, what is the world, what is God, and something resonating with the answer Vedanta gives and wanting to inquire more deeply and more fully understand that answer. And so, as I say, there's a beautiful practical pluralism that's kind of built into Hinduism, and especially when we come to Vedanta and also yoga and the traditional medicine Ayurveda, they're really the foundation of these three different traditions is this vision that nothing is away from pure consciousness, that separateness is an illusion, non-separateness is the highest truth. And it doesn't matter what religion you are, you can come and participate in embodying that truth and engaging the world through that truth. So I hope this helps you in forming a more complete story of the Hindu concept of God, and also introduces you to the tradition of Vedanta. Peace.